credits, I believe that was your voice that we heard for a song that you wrote as well.
Mine and Laura and Bruna, yeah, we wrote that together.
Very nice. I was hoping you could tell us a bit about the process of, at what point in the story you got involved, at what point in the movie you got involved with the songwriting as well.
So whilst I was shooting, I was on a run and I always made playlists for the films that I'm in or the projects that I'm doing, just because it helps to sort of create the world for myself. And I put a song on the playlist called Father, and that song is by Laura Mvula, and it felt like the language of the piece. So I texted her and I asked her if she would do a song with me for this piece, and she said yes. I sent her some materials so that she could sort of figure out whether or not she was inspired to do something, and she was, and then we took some time out after the film was made to sit down together and create something.
And I believe this was your first time producing as well, right?
Yes.
So what was it like for you wearing those multiple hats, both as an actress in what is clearly a challenging part, but a producer as well?
Manic. Very, very manic. Yeah, it was a lot to be a producer with a capital P and to lead this kind of film, because it meant that I was trying to navigate when each cap was on or off. One day I might be talking about scheduling and the time and whether or not we were going to lose the light and how many scenes we had left, and then the next we would be shooting Liberia.
Did those lines ever get blurred for you on set?
Yes, very much so. I definitely think that there are days I might have been insufferable. Just because it's hard to sort of switch off the emotion that you're dealing with whilst trying to deal with the logistics of trying to make something that difficult happen at the same time. I was lucky because I have an amazing producing partner in Salome Williams, who is the other half of my production company. So on the days where I really couldn't manage it, and there were definitely some days, she was right there with me. It was tough because we actually shot all of the past first. So we shot everything in the house, the massacre, her past in London, all of that. We shot it in chronological order before we went to Greece. So I really was carrying it with me. That there's like the image that was replaying in my head, and the things that were happening were sort of on repeat. Because I think some people don't realize that when you're doing something like that, your body doesn't necessarily know what's real and what's not. Everything that happens, it happens for real, as far as your body is concerned. So you're carrying whatever trauma or whatever hurt or pain that you pick up from those moments, those scenes, into the rest of the movie. So it was heavy. It was really tough. There were definitely days where it was harder to function than others. Yeah, I think it was a little tough for both of us at times. I think he was so invested in the piece that sometimes he would carry the character as if it was still on the page and with him, and we would have a couple conversations where I would ask him to sort of let me have her. We both cared deeply for this woman, but there had to be a moment where he let go, so I could do with her what I needed in order to tell the story. And I think managing someone who, I think he has already had fears from before, because he hasn't necessarily dealt with actors with experience. So I had to sort of reassure him that I was okay and I knew what I was doing. And once we found our rhythm, we sort of were hand in hand. We found our way together. It took some time, but we got there. Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, there was an element of drawing from family experience for this part as well.
Yeah, my mother was 15 or 16 when the Biafran War in Nigeria was happening. So she was fleeing with her sisters, and I asked her about it, and she's told me some of the stories about her experience where she wouldn't have any food, and they would have to flee from one place to another, and it was her and her siblings and her mother, and so this sort of trauma is something she knows quite well, and I had conversations with her about what that experience may have been like for her and the fear that she was feeling. I'm very glad that she's okay and she made it, because otherwise I would not be here. But yeah, it was. I sort of had her occasionally in my mind when working with her, when working with Jacqueline.
There are so many scenes when, you know, Jacqueline is constantly surrounded by extras, surrounded by all these lively people on the beach, but at the same time, you maintain this sense of isolation almost. What is it like for you to have to tap into that despite being surrounded by people constantly?
Very lonely. It was really lonely. Because and often it was like that, you know, because not necessarily having conversations with everyone, because it doesn't necessarily feed the peace. So I was very much on my own. And it does sort of garner a sense of sadness and this essence of being on an island on your own. But that's sort of what she's sort of adrift by herself, having to figure it out. And I don't know that when you meet her, she's necessarily ready to talk or be with anyone, really. I think that her loneliness is a little bit of a survival mechanism. I think it's informed it greatly, to be honest. I think there is this, even if I think it's not there, I think every decision I make comes from the want to broaden the way in which we see ourselves and where we see ourselves and how we see ourselves, whether or not it's past lived experiences or things that we just never get to see. So everything from Harriet to Jacqueline, who is often a person that you might walk by and not even notice, to the Wicked Witch of the West, who is bigger than life. I think I'm constantly trying to place us in spaces that we might not necessarily see ourselves, but I'm also trying to make sure that people see some of the experiences that we as a whole may have lived, but I'm also trying to make people see past the experiences and the human being behind them. I think that each individual is more than the sum of their parts, and I think each individual is more than what they've been through. And I think sometimes we're tarred with the things we've been through as opposed to the things that we can do and our humanity that we are.
Jacqueline's dynamic with him.
Yeah. Her dynamic stems from the fear that she's experienced in her past. If you notice that what she's surrounded by mostly are young boys who and I think the memory of that is plastered onto this poor innocent man who is suffering and dealing with the effects of being displaced himself, to be honest. And I think she has to face that she is placing something on him that isn't his, and has to reckon with that herself. I think what I loved about that moment for me and for her is that even in her suffering, she's not perfect, and she's made the mistake also of tarring someone else who's going through something with judgment. And I think there's a redemption that she doesn't necessarily get, but at least seeks, I think. Yeah. Just to be in 2016, I was still on stage, and I read it, I think I either read it on a two-show day in between, or I read it in the interval. Not a good idea either way. And I knew automatically that I wanted to be in it, and it was originally supposed to be directed by Bill Paxton, who you saw in memory of. And Bill Paxton unfortunately died, I think 2017, and then I thought the film had gone away. Then in 2019, his wife wanted us to continue and brought the film back, and this time I was asked to produce and be in it? And I said yes. And then the pandemic happened. And we spent the whole of the pandemic on the phone, on Zooms, figuring out what to do, trying to find funding, the whole 9 yards. And then in 2021, we finally got to shoot it. So it took some time, but I was determined to make it. Yeah, so for a week in London, and we shot the rest of it, the entirety of the film in Greece. And I guess the process was just about finding out how to express things internally and turn down the noise on certain things, you know? There's an interesting thing about figuring out how to become invisible, which is something I was learning as we were going along with her. And it went from I want her to know how to do that to I would like to do that. I would like to be invisible. I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to be seen. I don't want any of it. And figuring out how to use that as a protective mechanism. But I also wanted to make sure that her inner life was still beating. It's why little things like the nose ring didn't disappear, so that you were still connected to the life that she had. And when you meet her, she's still like alive and vibing, and she's like full of life, so that you can see how much is taken from her when she gets to Greece. That this thing is chopped away at the person that she was, but it's not completely gone. That there's still a want to hold on to what was. It was just a really tough thing to do, because even though I was quiet, my head was really busy as well. It's a lot like you never stop thinking, you never stop wondering things. And actually, strangely, because I wasn't talking very much, I think my brain and my mind were probably louder than they've ever been, because that's the only place you can really go to have conversation, you know? Yeah.
Thank you.
It's okay.
I've actually got another one before we open it back up. So the first time I saw you on screen was in Widows,
Yeah.
where you have this very self-assured, almost Tom Cruise-esque run.
Yeah.
In this film, obviously, you know, the running scene towards the end, you have a completely different kind of body language that suits this character and the story. So there have been a couple of questions about, you know, mood and posture and what you drew from. Was it a sort of intentional process of like, how am I going to, you know, how am I going to shape this run, or was it something that came naturally in the process of like digging into the character?
Well, I always try and discover what rhythm each character has, what movement is right for each character. There would be no reason for her to run like Tom Cruise, you know? And the reason she's running is very different to the reason why Belle would be running. Belle running to catch the bus because she's got to get somewhere is very different from Jacqueline running away from their house because she's terrified of being killed. And Jacqueline also running away from the house because she's terrified of being that vulnerable. That terrifies her. And running away from finally expressing what has happened. Again, very different from even when you meet Jacqueline running away from the house. I don't necessarily think I was like, how do I want to make this run? I think the situation and that understanding of who she was sort of denoted how she moved and how she ran. Yeah. I really loved this woman. I loved Jacqueline, and I was really particular about the way we treated her. The one thing I wanted was to make sure that when we saw her, we treated her with dignity. And that made me really protective over everyone else that was playing with me, my family. Susie Bemba, who was the young lady who played my sister, I was like, get over here under my wing, you stay with me. Because I wanted our experience to feel human. I'm very aware of the treatment of Africans in Europe, all over Europe, including the UK. And I think I felt really strongly about showing this particular experience because we just have never seen it. It doesn't, we don't see it on screen often at all. And often when we do see it on screen, we take the dignity away from human beings. We forget that these people have lives, have families, love music, love dance, love food, have, boyfriends, and we take all of that away and we just see them as those who have nothing or those who have lost. I just didn't want that for her. I wanted us to see her as a whole, because I felt like that was really important for us to see a woman that looks like you and I in this situation, but is a whole human being and is not what's the word I'm looking for?
Disassociated?
No, is not, I guess the word is determined by her surroundings.
Defined by?
Defined. It's not defined by the things that have happened to her. That, I was really particular about that. I wanted to make sure that we understood what was happening to her, that we understood these things that happened, but she had decided that she was trying to make it every day, and she was trying to make every day as dignified as possible, which is why everything from how she placed the soap to her cup, her toothbrush, how she laid her bed, those things are things I decided. I want that bed to be perfect. This is how she fixes it. It's going to be perfect for where she is. Everything is so, because we don't lose those things because of our situations.
The joy and what you felt like it meant to your character.
How do you find them? I think I waited till we could do those things, and I just let myself enjoy them, because they felt like a bit of a breath of fresh air. It's like those moments are moments when I didn't have to be as heavy or didn't have to carry as much, like literally being on a bike and having someone else ride it for you, and you can just be in the wind. And it did feel like that we were riding down a hill, so I could just like let it happen and be there for a second and not necessarily think about anything and just enjoy. And I think those are the things you want. And people, we don't get rid of joy. That's what we do. Even in the worst of times, we seek out the joyous moments. And I thought that was just really important to do whilst we were shooting, and in those moments to really actually genuinely dig into the joy of it. I loved that moment too. Yeah. Okay. Key takeaway. The thing that comes to mind immediately, do you remember the conversation that they're having when they go to the restaurant? And she sits down and they talk, and she says, sometimes it's nice to just sit. That's the line that comes to my head. I think that for her is a really massive thing, because she's moving all the time. She doesn't necessarily stay still at all. Even when you think she's still moving. She still has to move from place to place, and she doesn't get the chance to just sit. And I think what I take from that is that the small things that we take for granted can be huge, massive steps for people. And I don't ever want to take for granted the things that I think are small. So just the small act of sitting now looks a little different to me, And I think that is a really cool new thing to see life through, that lens, that every little thing is important, every little thing is special. The opportunity to do very simple, mundane tasks without fear. I think those things are really important, and way more special than we give them credit for.